Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
We are live, starting the webinar. I would like to ask everyone who is still joining to just type a little message in the chat, maybe introduce yourself, say hello, say where you're from. If you're an IHS alumnus, let us know. And yeah, we'll start in a few seconds. Swati?
Okay, shall we start now?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. Namaste. Good evening for someone. Good morning. Good afternoon, because we are from the global world. I'm Swati Thapa. Currently, I'm Vice President of IHS International Alumni Board. I'm also work with the foundation, Pratimannima Memorial Foundation. It's a not-for-profit organization, and I'm based in Western Nepal. I'm also governing board of trustee of the semi-government organization under Ministry of Forest and Soil Conservation in Nepal. Currently, I'm also lecturer of poverty and inequality at Lumini Buddha University for the master's program in international development studies. About my educational background, I have completed my master's in conflict, peace and development studies and MSc in urban management and development from IHS, of course, from Erasmus University, the Netherlands, and also MPhil in public administration from Tribhuvan University, Nepal. Now I'm really looking forward to start my PhD very soon. So welcome everyone to our webinar. The topic for our today's webinar is post-war reconstruction strategies. I'm just going to let you know a little bit the background of this webinar. Russia invaded Ukraine on 24th February 2022. After massive bombarding attacks, some major cities are completely destroyed, as you all know. Besides thousands of people that are killed, there are about 30 million displaced people, and among them, it is very disheartening that 2 million are kids. As soon as the war ends, the majority of the people will come back home. Still, hundreds of thousands of people don't have a home anymore because of some cities, they are completely destroyed. The experience of the past shows us that the preparation for the reconstruction can and should be done while the war is still going on. That's why, this is the most important and the burning topic of today's looking at the present scenario. So we decided to start this, do this webinar, and also we wanted to share the valuable experiences as well. From our IHS board, we have a great team. We have Stefana Kozan. She is the International Alumni Relation Officer, and she's also in the board. We have Oleksandra. She's the president. Myself, I'm the vice president, as I said before, and Dhruv Bal, he's the global network builder. And we have Maria Isabel. She's the communication coordinator. Now, I would like to move forward and request Stefana to give her welcome remarks and start this webinar officially. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Swati. Hi, everybody. So, as Swati mentioned, well, my name is Stefana Kozan. I've been with IHS for the past 7 years. And, well, I would just like to thank you all so much for attending today, for taking the time on behalf of the Alumni Relations Office in IHS, which I also represent here today. Now, having a very international group of alumni obviously means we really have people from all around the world under our umbrella, so to say, and this really also makes us aware of the very complex circumstances that people face everywhere. So I would just like to take this moment to acknowledge the different realities and the context where people live, the difficulties that they face. We sympathize with people all over the world who are facing wars and other disasters, and we are aware of the very big inequality when it comes to reporting of the media, to international response, to aid and other recovery measures. And we hope that the current situation and also this webinar, we hope it can serve as a guiding point moving forward for everyone. So we hope to create a conversation and create, and share knowledge that can serve everyone. Now, this webinar, like all of our webinars, of the alumni webinars, it came to be because of our alumni. So usually alumni propose a webinar topic and we do our best to make it happen. In this case, I have to mention also Oleksandra, our president of the Alumni International Board, who is definitely, the main thing about her in this context is also that she's Ukrainian, not just an urban planner, so that weighs heavily. And we hope, like I said, we hope this webinar will serve everyone who has an interest or, something at stake in contexts like this affected, where people suffer from displacement and infrastructure damage. And I also want to take the chance to invite any of our alumni who are interested in organizing webinars to let us know via email at alumni@ihs.nl what you're interested in organizing, and we will do our best to support you. And finally, I would like to thank our speakers for accepting to be here today and for taking the time. We really, really appreciate your presence here and you sharing your knowledge and insights. And I pass the mic on forward to Oleksandra.
Thank you, Stefana. My name is Oleksandra Tkachenko, and here I'm because of I'm being a president of IHS Alumni Board, and regarding this, I'm also IHS alumni from 2015, and after that I stayed in Netherlands and worked here as an urban planner. And as Stefana said, we encourage our alumni to initiate webinars, and so I decided to use this opportunity to start a conversation on the post-war reconstruction. And I know that we have alumni from all countries which also faced recently war or disasters. And I believe that their experience is as valuable as Western, and we shouldn't neglect them. And in Ukraine currently, the preparation for the reconstruction is already going on in every level, both bottom up and top down. There are a lot of initiatives from local NGOs, architects, urbanists, researchers, for example, COHAT, Restart Ukraine, New Housing Policies, and they are forming networks to kind of coordinate the common efforts like Roskvit. And at the same time, government organize meetings with developers and big architecture companies. And will these top-down and bottom-up activities will coordinate? We don't know, but we hope so. For now, I believe that our urban policies are one of the weakest points there, but I hope that we could use this moment to make a change. And meanwhile, we also see a huge interest from international community, which on one hand, we are really thankful for, but at the same time, it's sometimes scary. We a bit scary of some of them, like bold announcements of star architects, and we don't want to become a kind of tabula rasa for their ambitions. But anyways, Ukrainians, as never before, are ready to collaborate and work hard on the common goals. And I believe that capacity building and knowledge sharing is one of the most viable support that they need now. And that's why it's one of the reasons that we organize now, start a conversation and look for any kind of experience that other people have. Thank you. I will pass the word to Swati.
Thank you very much, Stefana and Oleksandra, for your very wonderful words. and the wonderful start of the webinar. Now, I would like to let you all know that we have three great experienced scholars and the professionals, speakers. So today we have Pavlo, Fedoriv, Claudio, Acioly, and Anila. So we are going to first start with the Pavlo. The topic of his presentation is Housing Policies Before the War, No Social Housing Finance Models. So a little bit introduction about him is that he's urban geography and housing policy researcher. He has completed MSc in political geography. He has worked with Unica Euromaster in Masters in Unica Euromaster in Urban Studies. He's also the co-author of Public Housing Policy in Ukraine, Current State and Prospects for Reforms in 2019, author of the online course Housing and Housing Policy, Where and How We Will Live, 2020. And now I'd like to request Pavlo to start his presentation. Over to you, Pavlo. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good evening to you all. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight, and all the colleagues from the IHS for this opportunity to present, and for your interest in this topic and your attendance. Secondly, I would like to apologize if some of you might leave this event with still some questions unanswered. I believe that being limited in time, I will have an opportunity to only provide a glimpse into such a complex topic as housing policy. And if you have some questions, or if you would like to get more details or materials, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I'll try my best to find time to respond to you with suggestions of what or whom to read if possible. I would also like to correct a small thing. The war that is going on now in Ukraine has started in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. And since that time, we already had more than 1 million of internally displaced persons from the Crimea, but also from Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. I believe that in a way, the inability of the Ukrainian state to provide durable and sustainable housing solutions for these people also has serious implications for its inability to provide safe and affordable housing to people now. I have a few slides which I will share now, yeah, also, as Swati said, I'm a co-author of the text which is called Housing Policy in Ukraine, which you might find just easily Googling it, like housing policy in Ukraine. And one of the first searches in Google, you'll find it at the SEDOS website. The majority of the report is in Ukrainian, although huge chunks of it are translated in English. And the graphs, I believe that you can easily translate with Google Translate or contact me to get more details on it. Oops. Trying to open my presentation now. Yeah. So what I'm going to talk today is some basic things about housing policy in Ukraine and what implications they are having for today and tomorrow in sense of the potential reconstruction activities in Ukraine. Also, I believe in the housing policy as something that is rather continuous. I also think that the war and the full-scale invasion of Russia are the watershed moment that is going to pose completely new challenges, both because of its scale but also because of the nature of the change that is going to be required from the housing system of Ukraine. So how can we characterize the housing policy in Ukraine? I believe that some of you might know something about the so-called post-socialist housing system, or if not, I'll provide some details on it. Although it's pretty well researched, you can refer, for example, to such scholars as Zaviska or a lot of housing scholars from, for example, European Network on Housing Research. Ukraine was somehow missed from this post-socialist studies, both because it was different from the Central, Eastern, and Eastern European countries, but also because it was different from Russia. Although Russia received considerably more attention and therefore was a role model for the so-called post-communist countries, although they might be completely different from it. So what was the housing policy in Ukraine before the independence? The majority of housing stock and the land was nationalized in the Soviet Union, and therefore it was provided to people according to the so-called housing needs, which were described in terms of living space. The majority of urban housing stock was the so-called subsidized rental housing, which was provided according to these housing needs and distributed through the so-called apartment queue. To be in an apartment queue, one had to be either from enterprise that had a priority for their workers to be provided with housing, or, for example, a veteran or socially disadvantaged family. So, in a sense, the Soviet housing system was the commodified, non-profit, subsidized rental housing. It was also not a clear rental housing system because housing stock could be inherited or even exchanged between different families. And the tenants, therefore, had more rights than just a right to occupy one's apartment. By the beginning of the 80s, it became obvious to the party and the majority of people that the state would not be able to provide such a quasi-home ownership to the majority of people. And therefore, the party was looking for different ways to provide housing to people. For example, there was a strong push for the development of housing cooperatives in the 80s, which were meant to provide housing for those who could, for example, get subsidized loans or self-construct housing for themselves. However, it all started to move to home ownership in the end of the 80s. The beginning of it was a declaration by the state for the so-called right to buy, where the sitting tenants were given a huge discount and an ability to privatize their flats for a price amounting closer to 10% of the real value of the housing stock. When this happened, the majority of people understood that the so-called apartment queue and that the ability of state to provide housing for them would be minimal in the future. However, it had still strong consequences for people's beliefs in a policy and in their sense of what is just and what is right. When Ukraine got its independence in 1991, it also inherited not only the housing policy and code of the Soviet Union, but also the so-called apartment queue, which was the main housing program by that moment. However, in 1992, the law on the privatization of housing stock was passed, and the sitting tenants received a right to privatize their apartments for free. This situation was developed not only because of the push from bottom up, from the tenants themselves, but also from top down. On the one hand, the international institutions like the World Bank were saying that privatization of housing stock would give people access to assets that they would be that they might use as a collateral to get loans from the bank and start their own business, for example. On the other hand, it was also the push from the municipalities that were trying to minimize housing expenditures and push these expenditures on the sitting tenants who will be responsible for the maintenance and repair of the housing stock. In a way, this mass-free privatization in the beginning of the 90s created a situation where all the inequalities in access to housing were inherited and solidified. For example, if one had a big apartment or a smaller one, or the quality of the housing stock was different, but also the location. But the main difference was if one had an apartment by that moment, or if one was still in an apartment queue or living with his parents with no potential prospect to acquire their own apartment. It also, however, helped people to live through the 90s when the inflation rate was skyrocketing and the cost of living was also high. So it provided housing almost for free for people who were most in need by that moment. For the housing policy, it also meant that the state municipalities were losing their social housing stock on an extremely rapid scale. By the end of the 90s, the majority of housing stock was privately owned. So in 2011, the highest home ownership rate in Ukraine was 95%. So almost all housing stock was privately owned by private persons. But that meant that in the 90s, this system created a perverse tenure balance where you had a lot of households who were so-called asset rich, but income poor, and were unable to maintain and repair their housing, but also pay for the utilities that they were using. How was it possible to sustain such a mass home ownership system and such a tenure balance? There were two main reasons for that, I believe. The first one was that, as I said, a lot of households were not able to pay for the maintenance and repair of their housing. Therefore, these expenses were pushed in the future, expecting the state or the municipality to renovate their housing using either cheap loans or to pay it by themselves. The second reason for that was poor land management and land use regulations, which created a system in which real estate taxation effectively did not exist. So people privatize their apartments and share in their multi-apartment buildings, but the land plots beneath their buildings were not privatized and were not owned by the people. I believe that it is one of the things that is going to have a huge consequences for the future reconstruction of housing and cities, and I'll explain a bit about it a bit later. So in a way, the whole housing policy in Ukraine in the decades after the privatization created a system in which we had an extremely high home ownership rates, which is the majority of housing owned outright, because the mortgage market was just lagging and not developed properly. And on the other hand, this housing stock was completely commodified, and housing was mainly perceived as an asset and not as a roof over one's head. It was mainly because, as I've said, the housing expenses for people were extremely low. And even if one would not be able to pay for his or her own utility payments, the state would provide subsidy for that. This structure of housing expenses would have major implications for the housing system as such. First of all, the structure of these housing expenses meant that people were trying to buy housing as soon as possible, because as soon as they became homeowners, their housing expenses were shrinking considerably, and meant effectively that they had to pay only utilities. Also, this mass privatization created the false illusion of stability of housing system. What I mean by that is that it created an illusion among the policymakers, but also among the common people, that everyone has a place to live, or is going to have a place to live, because the apartment queue is going to be still sustained in the future. The second part of that was that homeownership was was the main housing tenure during that time. So instead of developing social housing stock, which was considerably shrank during the 90s, the main housing programs were the demand-side subsidies for homeownership, either trying to subsidize interest rates or even pay a share of a price for apartments for people. But also, as I've said, the housing expenses for homeowners were extremely low. And therefore, and as the majority of people were living in their privately owned apartments, the private rental sector was small, but also it was marginalized. As I've said, homeownership was the dominant housing tenure, but also extremely expensive. And why was it expensive? Because, as I've said, the expenses for homeowners were extremely low, meaning that they were able to withhold the apartments from the market for as long as they wished, until they find a proper tenant who would pay enough for them to actually rent it out. Or they could just easily wait for short-term rental tenants who would move in. So what that means nowadays? There are two main issues, I would say. The first one would be the mass dislocation of people because of the full-scale war and a growing demand for the private rental sector. When people moved to relatively safer areas of Ukraine, they created a huge demand for housing in these areas. Therefore, the private rental sector responded with skyrocketing prices, which put a lot of housing beyond the reach for normal people, but also was taking a significant share of their money to provide just a roof over their head. The second one would be that the main destruction of housing stock, massive destruction of housing stock. I put the assets in there as well. As I've said, after the privatization, housing became one of the main assets that a lot of households had, and sometimes it was the most expensive thing that they had in their life. In a sense, it creates two issues for the future reconstruction. On the one hand, it means that for a lot of people, the ability to live rent-free is not going to be in place, because they are not going to own this housing anymore. And on the other, I believe that the main efforts that are going to be put in the reconstruction have to be channeled in efforts to repair the housing stocks that already exist in place, and therefore recuperate at least part of the potential value of these assets for people. As I've said, the housing was taken apart from the land plots beneath it, and it might create a situation in which a lot of the damaged housing is going to be reconstructed on completely different terms that these former homeowners would like, but on the other, there would be no need for the nationalization of land in order for the better urban planning in the completely destroyed cities. So what's next? In order to try to understand what's going to happen and how these things are going to convert into the potential future policies, we, together with a team of housing and planning scholars, created this initiative which is called New Housing Policy. You can find more details about it at the website that is put there. And I will be glad to answer your questions if you have any.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Pavlo, for the wonderful presentation. Now we have like 5 minutes for question and answer session. If anyone has any questions, then please type in the chat box, then I'll read it out for you. Thank you. Any questions from anyone? We will also provide you email addresses of our speakers. If you have questions to be asked later on, or if you want to find out something new, or if you also want to organize the similar kind of webinar, if you're interested, then please feel free to write to Pablo and also to us. I don't see any questions yet, but we will just take 1 minute or 2 minutes more. If you have any questions, then please type in the chat box.
I wanted to suggest that maybe if there are questions later, sometimes there's already a question, but if there are questions later, maybe they can also be asked at the Q&A, at the last one maybe, and then do that one longer, but there's already a question.
Okay,
yeah,
so do you want to read it, or should I do it for you?
Oh, I can do that. It's a question from Brett Moore, and I believe he's from UNHCR, and he's asking, can you speak about housing options for the displaced, because recovery will take a long time? Yes, I will say that what is going on in Ukraine now is that the state is trying to provide small subsidies to people. So one is called Prehistok, which is basically a shelter, and it's a system designed by the ministry, which is a system where one is given a small subsidy, like 15 euros per person, in order to subsidize utility payments if they allow internally displaced persons to move in. On the other hand, I don't think that it's going to be effective, as the majority of people who already hosted IDPs did it for like rent-free, not taking any money at all. There are also some efforts by the authorities to try to renovate and convert non-housing buildings into housing stock, but it's also going to take a lot of time. There is also a push from the bottom-up approach, like initiatives in different cities trying to convert former dormitories or renovate some old municipal buildings. But I think that some of those are not going to be enough in order to provide housing for people. So what I myself believe that it might be the most effective answer to that would be, first of all, the audit of the existing housing stock, and then there is a so-called povinnost, I would translate it as a duty, which might be imposed on homeowners who have 1+ apartments in their ownership. So, for example, if one has 2 apartments or an apartment and a private house, the state might ask for people to host ITPs in that other place. Although I believe that the authorities nowadays are extremely cautious about this approach because they are afraid of the backlash from some homeowners or potential landlords who would rather like to still have their income, rental income sustained during this period. Yes, I also see affordable housing policy challenge. There is no subsidy for affordable housing. I see a question from Josh Barre about no subsidy for affordable housing, but I don't get what's that. So if you can, I don't know, turn on your mic and answer that or explain it a bit further, I'd be grateful.
Just letting you know, Pavlo, it's not possible to do that one.
Sure.
Maybe
Okay.
I can request John to email you later on with
Sure.
a little bit more description. So here's like another question, and this would be the last question that we will take it for you. What are the available options for accommodating the displaced as at the moment? Where are the displaced living at the moment in shelters, and how safe are they for a human being? This is from Dorothy Okello, if I pronounced it right.
So, on available options for accommodation, there are numerous options. Like the first one would be just not a housing stock, but collective centers like sport venues, or let's say, mainly sport venues and different education facilities where people are moving in. The other would be temporary solutions like modular houses that are provided, for example, by the donors. The other option would be hotels and different temporary accommodation that is provided to people, like former sanatoriums. And the next one would be the private rental sector, where some people are moving in. Although, as I've said, so far the state only subsidizes an extremely small sum for utility payments by these homeowners. Displaced living in shelters, how safe? I believe that they are relatively safe for people nowadays, but on the other hand, the problem is that no place in Ukraine is completely safe nowadays. Even the city of Lviv, which is the most located regional center, is constantly under rocket fire. So the housing stock might be okay, but the situation in general might be dangerous though.
Thank you very much, Pavlo, for answering all the questions and also for the wonderful presentation and giving insight information about the current situation in Ukraine. Now we would like to move forward. I just forgot to tell you all that for each of the speakers, the presenters, you have like 15 minutes for the presentation and 5 minutes we have allocated for the question and answer session. Now we would like to move on with our next speaker. He's Claudio Acioly. He's an international housing and slum upgrading expert, an architect and urban planner with over 40 years of experience in more than 30 countries, working as a program manager, resident technical and policy advisor, or short-term consultant to governments and national and international organizations like UNDP, World Bank, UN Habitat, GIZ, Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, etc. He is currently associated staff of the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies of IHS Erasmus University, Rotterdam, and Associate Fellow of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, United States, and Senior Manager and Team Leader of Acioly Ingeniería, Spain, leading EU-funded projects. Acioly was Senior Manager of GIZ and Director of the European Union's International Urban Cooperation Program for Latin America and the Global Covenant of Mayors for Energy and Climate in Latin America in 2020. He was Head of Housing Policy and Head of Capacity Building of UN Habitat Coordinator of the UN Housing Rights Program, and also the Advisory Group on Forced Evictions to the Executive Director of UN Habitat from 2008 to 2019. He was Senior Housing and Land Policy Expert of IHS from 1993 to 2008, and also the Chief of Architect in the Netherlands government-sponsored neighborhood upgrading program of Bejko from 1989 to 1992. He worked for the government of Brasilia in its citywide slum upgrading and resettlement program from 1983 to 1987, and managed several resettlement and upgrading of informal settlements and labor camps projects. Most of his work is publicly available in www.claudioacioly.com. So now I would like to request Claudio, the experienced, his all the professional experience with more than 40 years. So now I'd like to hand over and request Claudio to start his presentation. Over to you, Claudio. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this long introduction about my profile. Thank you. I would like to add one thing, and I'm really happy to be here among IHS alumni. I was also an IHS alumni in 1986 and 87. I came for the old 6-month programs that existed in IHS, and then was invited to a special program where I did a report on a number of cases in research I did in Brasilia. So I have been associated with the Alumni Association in several manners, so I'm really happy for this initiative and to contribute to this discussion. I also feel very touched by the presentation of Pavlo, because he touched a number of issues which I felt while he was speaking, should I just forget about my presentation and just dig into the situation where you have a post-war, post-disaster conflict situation where housing scarcity is serious, and what happens? How do people who are coming back, or those who remain, how do they access adequate housing? What kind of policy is actually effective on the short term to ensure that rental housing is accessible and is not exploited in a situation of enormous scarcity? So if you go back to cities and countries that were confronted with a post-war situation and the return of population, one of the major policy initiatives was to ensure that there is an upper hand on control of the land stock by the government and the regulation of rents, so that landlords would not take advantage of the situation and create more adversities for those who are coming back and are homeless, because the size of the homeless is enormous. So it is a very complex situation for us to think about. Let me share my screen. Window, and my presentation has two, let's say, sections. One, I want to explore the challenge of forcibly displaced people in the world. Have a deep dive, or just I wouldn't say deep dive, but just a superficial overview about what is the situation that we find in the world. So conflicts are increasingly protected. Climate-related shocks are more intense and frequent. So they both contribute to a cycle of vulnerability. So this is an important word, vulnerability. People are vulnerable to a number of situations, particularly women. Sustainable development and durable solutions to displacement are not possible without peace. So the achievement of peace is a sine qua non condition for us to launch humanitarian relief and development programs and peace building. And these are not one after the other. They need to be tackled simultaneously at the same time. So if we don't address this from the start, we will not have a sustainable situation in the country that we are looking now, Ukraine. To reflect this understanding, the concept of humanitarian development next, or humanitarian development peace next, has emerged. It focuses on the work needed to coherently address people's vulnerability before, during, and after crisis. So these are fundamental elements for us to understand. It challenged the status quo of the aid system, which is overstretched, by the way, and operates with little coordination between project-based development and humanitarian interventions. We've seen that over and over. The years I spent in the United Nations, I saw that over and over and over repeating in situations in post-conflict countries, resulting in it not effectively meeting the needs of those most vulnerable people. Now, the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus, the HDP Nexus, aims to bring these three sectors in closer alignment to better address both the immediate needs of people affected by conflict, as well as the underlying causes of protracted crisis. So we have in the world 84 million forcibly displaced people. Among them, there are nearly 27 million refugees. Now we should add now the recent influx of refugees leaving Ukraine and Ukrainian cities. How many people are internally displaced in the world today? So 55 million IDPs, internally displaced people worldwide, as of 31st December 2020, the highest number ever recorded. The top three countries with the largest IDP population due to conflict and violence in 2020 were the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, and Ethiopia, as in previous years. Now, if we look at the situation, 80% of humanitarian action takes place in conflict-affected settings. And 9 years it takes for the humanitarian response to actually turn the clock around. So the conflict is the main driver of humanitarian needs. Current system is not sustainable, and we need to work collectively on ending needs. So three things we need to look in the context of a country or city under this situation. So how can we contribute on that? What we're looking for is self-reliant, resilient, peaceful societies. And there are these three elements needs to be addressed, these three dimensions, peace, humanitarian, and development must be tackled concomitantly, not in a sequence or not one after the other. So humanitarian, development, peace will bring us what we're looking for, resilient and peaceful societies. So how do we move this from concept to practice? And I think this is the challenge of practitioners who are in the field, who are in the UN organizations, in bilateral organizations that are working with these three elements in mind. So, and in the end, how do we contribute to peace? How do we make sure that within a society, and we know there are conflicts within the Ukrainian society as there is in other society under this situation. How do we contribute to peace and understanding and assimilating and understanding both parties that are in conflict? So how can we contribute? So the self-reliant, resilient, peaceful society should be our goal, our Northern Star, if I can say so. So UN Habitat and many organizations, particularly after the COVID pandemic, have been talking about building back better, because we had a situation before which was unsustainable, a lot of poverty, inequality, violence. So it all depends on which region, which city you are. The situation was far from being the things we're looking for when working with the HDP concept. So after a war and conflict, a climate event, after the pandemic, how do we build back better? What does it mean? So the presentation that I'm going to share now with you is a presentation I did for the Housing Forum in Central and Eastern Europe, which for me came a bit of a deja vu. And was interesting to see Pavlo speaking, because in 2007, we did a high-rise multi-family housing management and maintenance program for Ukrainians who came to IHS, and then they went back and we had action plans, etc. And they were describing a situation, the post large-scale privatization that took place in Central and European countries. That was really, let's say, a situation where the high-rise buildings were asking for help. Maintenance, the collapse of what existed before in terms of minimal maintenance of the stock, elevators, collective space, the surrounding land, the roofs and facades and the utilities. All that collapsed in one go when countries turned themselves into nations of homeowners, and virtually rental housing practically disappearing from the housing market. And one paradox I would put here for you to think about: how do you explain that the richest countries in the world, like the Netherlands, Germany, UK, US, have a significant percentage of their housing stock under rented occupation, and the poorest countries in the world become nations of homeowners? How do you explain that? This is the paradox, and there are rationale and there are serious implications for that. Now, the problem is not new, and this is the result of a research done, financed by the Dutch government in 2005, where we found a backlog already of $400 billion, which needing in repair. So if you would do a refurbishment and renovation, capital repairs on a current tempo, it would take 40 to 100 years. But in the meantime, we have a war, we have conflict, we have change in government, we have serious matters taking place in these countries, and the housing stock has not changed. And the situation that we find in many places is, as I said, a deja vu. So buildings energy inefficient by large, weakness in large scale of response, funding, strategies and policy, low ambition in decarbonization, 40% instead of 55% emission reduction, less efficient building stock and higher rates of energy poverty, particularly in Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Hungary. No plans to introduce much needed individual heat meters in multi-apartment buildings in Latvia. Without capacity building and demand for application of tougher renovation standards, workforce may not be able to go to scale and implement the renovation wave in Romania. And fossil fuel-based heating system is still widely adopted. So the EU has acknowledged this and has put resources, significant resources, to make a transition to more efficient, to more sustainable type of buildings that don't spend and don't carbonize the society and don't let's say, jeopardize the building, let's say the energy bill of households who are already subject to a certain high housing cost. So as you can see, significant amount of money now being put at particular types of funding to produce the type of renovations throughout Europe that is only bigger in transport, in clean transport. So 8 imperatives persistent until today: finance, the lack of funding and instrument; policy, national strategies not clear enough about housing states; refurbishments, capital repairs, and structure. So before the war and before destruction, and now that we need to talk about renovation, rebuilding, and total reconstruction, we need to take these things into account and build better, more sustainable, more clean, less costly for the population in terms of energy costs. Laws creating enabling legislation that will facilitate and encourage residents' participation in building management and housing management. The governance of the housing management and maintenance are lagging behind in most of the Eastern European countries. Strategies, lack of incentives and disincentives, so they stick of the carrot and the carrot. Energy and construction solutions, energy efficiency often recognized but not receiving policy attention or actions. So there is a capacity gap there, and also in technologies and materials. And participation, stakeholders participation, but also homeowners participation, individuals, NGOs, and so on. And the attitude, the mindset of policymakers in the wide public, not fit for purpose, understanding this radical change that is needed in heating, in the building, in the management of the housing stock, in policy and legislation. More responsibility to the state and more responsibility for individuals and the society, and more accountability to the state. So now, very quickly, I will just share with you, because my time is over, some examples of how the management of the housing stock has been addressed. So this is Singapore, which is a state and a city at the same time, and the town-country councils, which has the different townships or districts, if you wish, or housing states that were produced by the Housing Development Board, which was an institution that was created that allowed this transition from a country that was full of Islam to a country with no Islam, and an effective management of the housing stock. So looking at, let's say, a particular district or a township that you see there, what was the solution they created in order to have this superb housing management? The population does the election to parliament, and particular parliament members who are coming from these locations, they are elected members and residents of, let's say, this town council that, let's say, take the responsibility for all housing management, for all affairs that takes place within these districts. So there are rules for election, a board that coordinates this. So it's quite interesting. While in many other countries, the solution is per building, is per let's say, for horizontal or vertical condominium or homeowners associations. So while there is a combination of different buildings in one district. So it's a very interesting solution, because it creates accountability and political responsibility, and creates quite interesting outcomes. If you go to Singapore, you will see the incredible sharpness in the maintenance of the collective space and the co-ownership in the buildings. So, and it's very interesting because there is contribution, and there is the obligation, the legal obligation to create a fund for long-term, let's say, cyclical refurbishments and expenses and so on. So it's quite interesting. And South Korea, in these two countries I'm showing you because I worked there in my last years at UN Habitat, is a similar situation. It's a collective set of buildings. So it's a council for occupants representatives. So looking at this complex you saw in the eastern Songpa district or Yongpa, so you see the multifamily housing subject to compulsory management. So the residents elect the Council of Residents representatives, and these representatives are the ones who, let's say, run the entire management. There is a chairperson, an auditor, directors, etc., and a council of the occupants' representatives, the residents of the different housing units. So it's quite interesting as well because it involves different stakeholders, including a very interesting entity that you find there, that is the certified housing manager. So there is this individual that is trained to do exactly what homeowners associations, for example, do in the Netherlands or in Brazil or in the UK. So it's quite interesting to see that both these countries they opt to have a very strong participation of citizens. And I think that when we look at the future of Ukraine or any country in that region, particularly when you're talking about rebuilding, refurbishing, reconstruction, and total reconstruction, we need to think about these solutions and think long term. So that, and take into account what we learn from these countries that created what I call a best practice in terms of housing management and housing maintenance. So just last slide, you see the difference between the different countries, where you have a council of residents representatives in Korea, you have a town council area-based management in Singapore. Both are compulsory. In the Netherlands, the Homeowners Association, VVE, is also, but it's based on a single building based management, also compulsory. In Brazil, is a Homeowners Association, single building based, also, let's say, compulsory. So there are many different solutions, different outcomes. And when you look at the final outcome is that it's a concerted approach to multifamily residential buildings. People get more responsibility, they participate, they get a sense of how important it is, maintenance for their property, for their assets. And I think these are the things we will have to look and do completely different than we're doing in the countries. With that, I stop, and thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudio, for a very interesting presentation. Now we have 5 minutes for like question and answer session. If you have any questions for Claudio, then please type in the chat box. You can also send an email to him and also the IHS Alumni Board. If it's okay, can you please share your email address, Claudio, in the chat box to our participants?
May I think it's quickly if I ask question, not typing, but orally. On one of your presentations, Claudio, and other presentation, you spoke about people-led housing. And I would like to ask you, how do you think in such a scale of disaster and war, to what extent we can use this approach? How is it for the bringing back housing stock?
Yeah, that's a challenging situation because again, the peace, humanitarian, and development have to come together simultaneously as you move. So people have to heal because it's not only about you or different groups being forcibly displaced because of the war, but also internal issues, conflicts that were already there and not sufficient resolved. So there is a healing, a reconciliation to be done. At the same time, government to come on and provide actually relief, while at the same time planning ahead and anticipating. Obviously that you will need support from external funding, from different multilateral and bilateral organizations in order to enable the basis for sustainability to be put there. So it's not, and it has to be people-centered. It has to be looked at people's needs, and we need to understand, the trauma of being evicted by disasters, by war, by violence, by different external forces is enormous. So it needs to bring people at the center, obviously, but combining the necessary understanding about what are the needs of the people that come back, and you see there is only land and nothing more, or rubble, or part of your house is destroyed, and you have no means. So how do you get started? So there are so many situations, and I think it is this integrated approach, bringing different disciplines, different organizations working together in a coordinated manner, so that we can actually help and create a conducive environment for people to get their life back into their striving. And there will be a lot of healing, I imagine, and reconciliation with many things. Because if we don't have that, we might continue a situation that is not conducive for this society that, those drawings, that we're looking for, this peaceful, thriving society. And I think that should be our northern light.
Thank you. There are more questions now in the chat.
There are two questions for you. I'm just going to read it from Ishita Agrawal. Thank you for that interesting global perspective on rebuilding. I was wondering if we can draw parallels between rebuilding in Ukraine and the rebuild of Vietnam after the Cold War in 1975.
Vietnam, is that?
Yeah. That's the first
Okay.
question. Vietnam.
Yeah. Okay. I worked in Hanoi, and I cannot say I know Vietnam, but I know Hanoi a little bit. I was coordinating the housing profile of Vietnam, and I did quite a number of workshops for policymakers, and I visit the country a number of times, and I must say I gained an enormous respect for the Vietnamese people and Vietnam, how they put aside the atrocities that took place in the war and started picking up their development, and the incredible discipline and entrepreneurship that they carry out, including the transition from, let's say, a very centralized and centrally planned economy to a more, let's say, a socialism with elements of market. And so how do you do that? I think you cannot compare countries, but perhaps we could take lessons from countries like Vietnam, with and even Korea. Don't forget, Korea, when it came out of the war, he had like $350 GDP per capita. That was the income. And now, 50, 60 years later, the GDP per capita goes up to more than $35,000. Now, how did they do that? Quite a different approach than Vietnam, but certain similarities. People-centered policies, creating self-esteem, creating strong government intervention in the land sector, compulsory land acquisition, let's say, incrementing innovative approach to let's say, overcome the housing shortage that the war caused. So creating different modalities of housing production and accepting a transition where people will live a little bit tight, not adequate, but as part of the transition from post-war to something a little bit better. So I think these are some of the elements that I think could be very useful for, let's say, Ukraine and countries that are coming out of such a dramatic war situation, to look at how other countries came out. What have we learned, and what can we do even better? And what have we learned, that things that did not work? This is most important. What is that did not work? So, and when you see the trade and the way Vietnam, let's say, took the whole relationship with the United States, is incredible. You could expect, because of the atrocities and things that took place, that they would be enemies forever, and that's not the case. They do a lot of trade and there is a lot of exchange, and I think that's the reconciliation that I mentioned. That we need to have political negotiation and the capacity to put opposing parties on the table and see what is best for our people.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudio. We have like 4 more questions, but before that, because of the time limitation, I'd like to kindly request you that if you want to answer some of them, then if you can answer some of them, then you can write in the chat box, or I would request our wonderful participants to email you later on to ask more about it.
That's fine.
And also, someone like Naisha, she has asked that, thanks, Claudio, for that well-informed presentation. Can you share the presentation? I think this would be the question for all of them. So if it's possible, then, share your question.
Yeah, I think this presentation, except the first part with the drawings, etc., humanitarian, but I think this presentation is in my website. If it's not, I can make the link available and people can look at it. But I think it's there. I'm not sure, because I don't update these things very often, to be honest.
Sure. Then also the webinar is being recorded, so you can look at that one as well. So everyone will receive the recording. If you've registered through whatever email you've registered, you'll receive an email, the recorded version. Thank you once again. Thank you very much, Claudio, for the wonderful presentation. Now we will move on to our next speaker for today, next and the last speaker for today. She's Anila Bejko. She's doctoral. She has completed her doctoral studies on urban development policies from Police University, Ferrara University, Italy in the year 2013. I'm going to talk a little bit about her work experience. She's an expert in territorial governance and public finance with about 20 years of experience in governance and public finance and urban management. She has specialized in business administration, and for more than 10 years, she has led development projects in various areas funded by donors such as EU, USAID, UNDP, STC, ZIZ, etc. She has also in-depth knowledge on regional development, territorial governance, and local finance. She has worked as a consultant to the Albanian government in the reform for regional development and cohesion, administrative and territorial reform, decentralization, and local government, etc. She has extensive knowledge and experience of local government and service delivery at the local level in the West Balkan region, informality and human capital, etc. Currently, she is the deputy team leader of the program co-financed by the Swiss and Austrian governments for regional development in Albania, as well as the head of decentralization local and regional government unit in Copland, and she's a lecturer at Police University. She has got various publications. She is the author and co-author of a number of policy papers and articles, which is a great thing. And she has more than 17 years participates in projects inside and outside the country as the consultant and project manager. So now I would like to request Anila to start her presentation. And just to let you know that the topic of her today's presentation is Hope Plan Experience, Rebuilding After the Balkan War, Reconstruction After the Earthquake Process, and closing with the border questions. Reconstruction is not only about housing. So that's her topic. So now I would like to request Anila to start her presentation. Over to you, Anila. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Swati. I will try to share my screen, so just bear with me for some seconds. Okay. So among others, I'm also an IHS alumni, so thank you for having me in this webinar to discuss on the post-war reconstruction strategies. War is devastating in terms of impacts at all levels: human, physical, capital, social, and so on. Same can be said also for natural disasters such as earthquake, flooding, etc., which unfortunately we are facing more and more recently. So it's becoming important to reflect and discuss on how to use the situations that the crises create and that are created due to these factors and move forward. And as UN refers to the famous Churchill quote, "Never let a crisis go waste." This basically is also somehow the topic I want to focus my discussion. I was very kindly presented by Swati, and I would, but on the other hand, I would like also to present the organization where I come from and which I'm here also to talk on behalf of. It's CoPlan. It's a 25 years old organization with more than 25 full-time employed experts, which contributes to sustainable development and good urban and regional governance, tackling key environmental issues, developing civil society, and promoting community participation. In 2006, a group of people from CoPlan also decided to establish Polis, a private Albanian university, which generated from the experience of CoPlan, especially on the issue related to urban management and governance, with the ambition to create a critical mass of educated people for better and smart management of the territory. Today, in Polis University, as one of the 5 universities of in the country, we offer the opportunity also for students from Ukraine and also researchers from Ukraine which would like to study or work in this university. So I'm using this opportunity also to make this announcement. I'm going to talk about management of crisis situation created from devastating events, war and earthquake. And usually when we think about it, emergency and managing an emergency situation comes to our mind. So one of the risks we face a lot while managing emergency is that we focus on details and tasks. And sometimes we might lose the big picture. Emergency will pass, hopefully, and we will need also to deal with long-term management and planning. And it is important to keep also this thing in mind. I've structured my presentation in the following topics, and I also would like to say that basically this is a common work, a work prepared together with my previous mentors for many years, and now my colleagues, Dr. Vesnika Liai and Dr. Dritan Sotina. They have been directly involved in the post-war in Kosovo, and they continue to work in Copeland and Police University. Just a bit about war in Kosovo. It was the last of the Balkans war during 1990s, following the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. It was an armed conflict in Kosovo, which started already in February 98, and it lasted till June 1999. It was fought by the forces of that time Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which controlled Kosovo before the war, and the Kosovo Albanian rebel group known as the Kosovo Liberation Army. The conflict ended when NATO intervened by beginning airstrikes in March 1999, known as the Humanitarian War, which resulted in Yugoslav forces withdraw from Kosovo. The war precipitated a mass explosion of Kosovo Albanians as the Yugoslav forces continued to fight during the aerial bombing of Yugoslavia. There were about 700,000 Albanians and 100,000 Serbs, which were forced out of the country. A movement of this big number of people from Kosovo to Albania in such a short period was basically unseen since the World War II. And on the other hand, it put also a lot of pressure on Albania, which after the civil unrest of 97 and 98 was not prepared for so many people to come and ask to deal with that, ask for international help. The Albanian government at that time created the emergency management group, which had to deal and coordinate actions for all organizations, starting from the big ones like UNHCR and CHR and many other organizations and NGOs. There were about 435,000 refugees which had to leave Kosovo for Albania, according to UNHCR, and basically the numbers were, especially in the beginning of this period, like 4,000 people which were passing the border, crossing the border every hour. So the magnitude of it basically should be considered also related to the size of the countries we are talking about, and also the development at that time. This was just to set a picture of the situation. And at that time, Copeland basically was working with a number of projects dealing with upgrading, integration of informal areas in Albania. And it had to face the dilemma whether it should shift to the emergency response type of planning versus the long-term sustainable planning and development. From the professional level, to tell the truth, it was not considered of big interest, but when you know the level of preparedness of local governments and also central government, and when you see people from war atrocities, you could not stay indifferent, both as Albanian, but also as a human. On the other hand, not to be neglected the fact that there was a lot of money available in short term from a lot of donors, so due to donor support. What Copeland did at the time was it decided to use the experience and the work that was doing, but also to contribute in the situation. And the first thing was to approach the municipalities with whom the organization was working, and to help them dealing with a huge number of refugees, starting with how to set up centers for receiving refugees, and also how to provide needs and everything else. This was done through financial support of Coordate at that time. And after basically this was not ended at the moment that the refugees went back to their country, but basically it continued as a work with the municipalities, also in terms of how to further use the established facilities for other purposes, like for school centers or other community centers. Another way, or another thing that Copeland was involved during the war was basically, it's a story that I was told by my colleagues, but one day after the signing of the Kumanova Treaty, Copeland was approached from the World Bank and FAO to enter Kosovo and prepare a damage assessment survey in agriculture. This was because agriculture was one of the most prominent sector in the country, and on the other hand, it was difficult from all international organizations and donors to enter the country, while the situations in terms of governing the country was not clarified. It was the first countrywide survey organized by any donor organization in Kosovo, and it was used as the main input for the reconstruction and recovery program prepared by the World Bank in November 1999. Reconstruction basically is a very complex process which should consider different aspects, starting from the need for housing and infrastructure, but also to the need for economic, social programs. And among, or sometimes above all the needs is the one for capacity building, for building up capacities which should cope with the situation, and also to think for building up a sustained and better future. What followed, due to also a bit of this mentality, was the involvement of Copeland in a number of capacity building activities, mainly trainings for urban planning offices in several cities in Kosovo, especially cities divided because of ethnicity. So planning was considered as an instrument to benefit all communities and to help towards integration. Okay, I will shift now to some other experience which we in Albania had to deal with due to the devastating earthquake that hit the country in November 2019. It left catastrophic territorial, social, economic, and physiological imprints, both for the citizens and for the territory. The level of preparedness of the country was very low, and this was shown both at the central and also at the local level. Due to the fast mobilization of donors, also the government started to react relatively fast for both accommodating the people and for assessing the damages. The total effect of the disaster basically was amounted to almost 1 billion euro, following the post-disaster needs assessment prepared by the UNDP and the World Bank at that time. So UN and World Bank were among the first donors to support in terms of assessing the damages. Government undertook a number of initiatives, though sometimes confusing, to prepare legal and social arrangements and to prepare also for the donor conference. A ministry for reconstruction was established, and government of Albania managed to make a very good presentation to the Together for Albania Donors Conference, where 1.15 billion euros were pledged, and this was considered a record at the time. As part of the post-disaster needs assessment, UN also supported the government to prepare a recovery strategy, which highlights the fact that recovery is best accomplished at the local level. Basically, it is where the assistance, money, manpower, information from outside sources and from higher level of governments should be and this is vital. The same strategy calls for not letting the crisis go waste and builds upon principles such as ownership, community involvement, transparency and accountability, sustainable development, resilient development, equality, etc. As part of this program, basically also government prepared a website where everything which was related to the program and to the reconstruction was made transparent, and all the information can be found in this website. It prepared this reconstruction program was approved by the government of Albania, and it builds basically on 5 sub-programs. It deals with construction of new buildings and single houses units. It deals with recovery of existing buildings through grants, the social housing funds, rebuilding public facilities and infrastructure, and social and economic recovery measures. Basically, most of the effort, but also in terms of money, was given to the housing programs, and people were promised that the process will be finalized in 2.5 years. Basically, it is spring 2022, and to tell the truth, somehow there has been quite some good progress in trying to reach this objective. As the core of the, sorry about this, I need to go back and my computer is a bit slow. As the core of the reconstruction program, it was housing. It was the most affected sector with 85% of the damages. And the approach of the government was to consider the housing program more as a shelter program, so not as a compensation way of doing things. It foresees rules for providing shelters based on the size of the family, and it is a combination of grants for recovery, for home recovery, and free houses next to previous living areas in most of the cases. The national reconstruction process, on the other hand, does not focus on the social and economic aspects of vulnerable communities and those in need of social care. Instead, it focuses mainly on the physical damage, loss of buildings, physical infrastructure, etc. So it has a social economic recovery program, which targets employment, education, healthcare, cultural services, other community services to be affected. This has been also a requirement by the donors, but to tell the truth, this was not materialized in terms of actions. Beside the program, government also prepared an institutional mechanism to guarantee the implementation of the program. Without going into much details for the institutions involved in the process, the approach followed by the government was mainly a top-down one. So institutions and agencies from central government level have all the responsibilities, starting from the identification of the building sites, preparation of plans, projects, constructions, and everything. So municipalities are just the recipient of the product and of the housing, not even of the housing stock, because that is given to the people. With the exception of the municipality of Tirana, basically all local governments were left out of the process completely. While this approach on one hand can guarantee faster implementation and better control of the output at some level, it is a very short-term approach. It is considered as such, at least, especially if we refer to the principles based on which this program was designed, which are recovery is best accomplished at the local level, sustainable and resilient development, gender equality, people-based approach, etc. I am going to bring also another experience, because in parallel to the process of the reconstruction led by the government, some of the bilateral donors that were already present with programs in Albania shifted and reorganized part of their engagement funds in the country to support the earthquake-affected areas and the reconstruction program. Actually, I'm working in one of the programs of Austrian and Swiss government in Albania, which supports the government in Albania and the regional development reform undertaken by the country. The project had a grant scheme of 4 million euros, and we were requested by the donors to direct half of them for the earthquake-affected areas. So we had to design a grant scheme, which on one hand was complementary to the reconstruction program and actions undertaken by the government, and on the other hand, respects the principles of partnership, transparency, sustainability, and so on. To cut a long story short, there has been one main big difference between the approach of the government and the approach we followed through the project and with these donors, and that has to do mainly with the involvement and active role of the local governments from the identification of needs, areas of interventions and projects, to the ownership in terms of implementing and monitoring these funds. The type of projects we supported were belonging to areas such as economic development, green infrastructure, access to social service and education, access to cultural centers, always aiming to complement the interventions done by the government on housing sector. And I'm going to close my presentation with just some reflections and lessons learned on the process. So basically, every post-war, post-disaster situation differs in relation to factors, a number of factors which has to do with causes of the outbreak of the conflict, the way it was resolved also, the type of disaster and its magnitude, the initial economic conditions and the level of development of the country, the extent of international political support, the donors' interest in the country, etc. In the case of Ukraine, we have all seen also the huge interest in terms of donor interest, but also in terms of support. The impact of the war and of disasters is devastating in terms of human, social, and physical capital. But on the other hand, reconstruction effort is unique and should be country-driven or government-driven. The reconstruction effort basically should address a number of issues which have to do with a lot of things that were already discussed from Claudio and Pavlo also, but they have to deal with human development and human security indicators which will be deteriorated due to the event, destructions of infrastructure for sure. As urban planners, we will have to also look a lot in the reconstruction effort after internal population displacements, which are changing urban, rural patterns and are putting a lot of pressure on local governments to provide services and housing also. But there are issues which have to deal also with immigration causing brain drain, people needing social assistance, also economic decline, etc. Another hot issue which we have been facing, especially in the post-war situations, are the claims in property rights, which may make, on the other hand, very difficult further privatization processes. Environmental issues are also a huge thing which needs to be considered, and they might be related to contamination of soil or specific areas. So basically, the reconstruction programs bring to the country, beside the devastating effects, also a lot of money. And sometimes this money comes all together in one very fast moment. So that needs to be managed. The first thing to do and to manage this situation is to see the reconstruction program as an opportunity for the country, and so to design it based on the principles of resiliency and sustainability. I'm finishing with my two last points. So reconstruction programs should be carefully also consider government capacities at all government levels. And here I would focus on local government, which will play a crucial role to cope with increased pressure for housing and services. So they need to be considered and involved since the first steps of designing the reconstruction programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anila. Sorry, I just got this.
Looks like Swati has issues with her internet. It's not stable.
Dictated to Anila. Thank you.
I am, sometimes I can hear Swati, sometimes not. I think we lost her again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I cannot see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, maybe like I came to a different place because I just got disconnected. Maybe I'll just dictate it. Or Shasha, can you read out the questions?
For now, I don't see any questions for Anila in the chat, but please, if any of you has more questions, type them in the chat.
In any case, just to answer the previous discussion whether we could share the presentation, I think the presentation can be easily shared. I will share it with you guys, and then you can share it with all the participants if needed.
Thank you. Yeah, we will share it with the people who registered because we already have your emails, and we could also let you know when the recording of the webinar is online, and you can, if you want to recap something, you can always come back to that on our. It's also you can also check our previous webinars on our website, Making Cities Work. Let's see if any other comments coming. Okay, then I would like to wrap up the. Thank you a lot for all of you for coming, for the audience, and for our speakers to give your presentations and insightful moments. During your presentations, I made a bit of like a doodling. It was really fast, so maybe I still have some spelling mistake, but I did my best. And it was nice to see that there was some common thoughts regarding these issues that every speaker had. Also with the situation of the maintenances of the houses, there was similarities between what Pavlo was saying and what Claudio then mentioned, and interesting that they had a bit different ways how we can deal with that in the future. But also, it really touched me when Anila was saying about the capacity building and that recovery is best on the local level, because I also personally believe it would be like the fastest way we could deal with the situation. a bit shocking moments from Claudio that to reflect on the humanitarian aspects, we need at least 9 years. But still some positive moments on building back better, and that we shouldn't waste the crisis. This could be also shared. Maybe I need to clean it up a bit later. And I would like to ask if any of you, Claudio, Anila, or Pavlo, have any last words, reflect on other presentators. Pavlo, maybe we're starting with you.
Yeah, hi again. I would like to thank all of you. Thank you for your questions. And as I've said, please feel free to contact me. I've also got a lot of joy from Claudio's points about the potential for innovation. That was actually one of the things that we worked before with. The idea was to try to push major innovations using this, basically it's a reverse mortgage where people who have low income might use housing as a way to finance the renovation of the multi-apartment building stock. And if they would not be able to repay that mortgage, they would just stay as a future social housing tenants, and the housing stock therefore would be moved to the social housing stock. In this way, we could not only renovate housing, but also have this social dimension with the expanding social housing stock that would be also used for housing people who actually have low incomes, but still need good quality housing that they would be provided with this. Yeah, thank you. And check new housing policy, follow us. We will be having events in English soon. So yeah, thank you again for organizing this great event.
Claudio, would you like to have a closing word? You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me thank you all for organizing this. I think this is a very contemporary, difficult, but important subject to. Is not because of Ukraine, but because of the human suffering that Ukrainians, Syrians, Ethiopians, Yemenis, and so many people who are suffering the impact of war, displacement, and natural disasters as well. So congratulations to the Alumni Association to organize that. And to be honest, when the question came about Vietnam, I realized that I could even have stopped a bit and reflected more how Korea and Vietnam came out of such a dramatic war with destruction, loss of human life, loss of economy, loss of agricultural crops and so on, which is quite similar to some areas of Ukraine. And I stay with that last comment I made, that we should reflect, learn, not repeat the same mistakes, make it better, and take advantage that a problem can become an opportunity for transformation, for a different process of building a new society with people living together in the same space. So it's a long way, but we know it's a long way. And these two countries I mentioned are just a clear example that is clearly possible to do it. And I was very pleased to see the presentation about Kosovo, and because I was working with Copland those years, and it was very important for Copland to do that undertaking that you share with us, and very nice. I was very happy to see that, especially the photo of the team in the beginning. And this is an alumni led organization that was established by people like us who came to Rotterdam and decided to do things better and different when they went back home. So I think this is a good thing to reflect as well, that we share, many of us share this thing about, you know, the life before IHS and the life after IHS. For many of us, there has been a huge impact for having had the opportunity to study and in different phases of the institute in different historical period. So well done, congratulations, and thank you all the public to be with us, and very good insights and questions, and I hope it was very useful for all of you. Thank you.
Anila?
Well, after the words of Claudio, to tell the truth, I have not much to add. So I again wish you, I suppose that you will continue this type of webinars and discussions, not only about Ukraine, but about issues which are more and more you know, like hot issues around the globe. So I wish you good luck. And I also have to share that I really much appreciated all the exchange and communication we have had for the preparation of this webinar. So good luck, and I'm looking forward to the other one.
Thank you. I want to remind once again for the IHS alumni, if you would like to initiate webinars on a topic that you're interested in and you think is important, just contact us and we will help you to facilitate with that. And for that's it for today, and I wish you a nice evening. Bye. Thank you a lot.